right now, President Trump is seizing this time when Congress is out and many people tune out of politics to try to seize powers at the limits of presidential authority. Trump continuing to deploy federal troops in the streets, changing the look and feel of what was very recently a more peaceful, normal Washington, now with these militarized scenes. And Trump is claiming he can unilaterally fire a member of the Independent Federal Reserve, Lisa Cook, seen there with the Chairman Powell. And he's trying to tip the majority of what has always been this legally independent central banking board. This builds on the president's longer efforts to use partisan pressure against the board's leader, Powell, to try to take economic actions that would boost Trump's administration. There's more to it than that, more details, but that's the bottom line. And the Fed, of course, is crucial to the nation's economy, to trying to prevent or manage risk and even financial crashes. And while the Fed's record's not perfect on all of that, basically no one in finance thinks that it would be better or improved if it had more partisan interference, that's from either party, or a MAGA takeover, which is what Trump is trying to do here. No other president has tried to move like this. And many different presidents, of course, have dealt with monetary and economic policy. You're looking at two of them going in and out of our most recent severe financial crisis in the 2008 period, separate from sort of the pandemic adjustment. That was the big one. But neither of them ever tried anything like this. Fed governors cannot be legally fired over policy, even if you're mad and you think they missed the warning signs of something as big as the housing bubble. So Trump's social media post, which is new, where he claims he can fire Cook, is itself already legally dubious, as a breakdown report from the New York Times concluded. Trump's DOJ also investigating her for a mortgage application. This was from before she took this post. There's been no charges or official findings against her. Financial experts widely view that reference as a kind of a fake, a pretext for Trump's desire to consolidate power over the independent Fed.
She hasn't been charged. So until she's charged, I don't know why the president would go now, unless he's really confident she will be charged. And I don't think he knows that.
When you talk about American exceptionalism, one of the key components has been the independence of the Federal Reserve.
In this case, the president, I guess, is judge and jury.
Without her being charged, it's really difficult to fire her because you're just basically saying, yeah, listen, she may have committed fraud, I'm firing her.
History shows that politicians who mess with the independence of central banks are playing with fire.
Playing with fire, that's how all of this is being covered. If other presidents thought, of course, that they could just legally shape the Fed any time to help their administration or going into an election, they would have tried it. No other president in either party has ever gone this far. And we have looked over all of the developments for you, and it's clear Trump will have a fight on his hands. Cook says she'll keep working because Trump has no authority to remove her. She's taking him to court, which means we would expect it to be resolved there. Hard to see how courts could duck this direct clash within the federal government. The Fed also releasing a sober statement which says the Reserve will abide by any court decision and reaffirms its commitment to accountability and independence in the service of families, communities, and businesses. The wider push here is Trump's effort to gut career independence across the federal government. That was part of the hidden agenda in that Musk era, where the Musk-Trump purges were clearly about undercutting a lot of other sources of alternate power or even expertise in the federal government. Now, you might remember, we all lived through it. There was a lot of buzzwords like efficiency, but it was clear that masked the wider agenda, from ousting career prosecutors to labor statisticians to now Fed members. Now, the Supreme Court has largely allowed Trump to seize some of these powers. Apparently, the Republican-appointed justices think that it should be special rules for Trump to reward him for pushing farther and giving him powers they did not grant during Democratic administrations. But even this somewhat tilted, MAGA-friendly court has already noted that the Fed is different, more protected and independent. So unless somebody relents, tonight's news will tee up a court clash over this power grab. Now, you may say we've had a lot of these. Trump seems to get away with a lot. If he's not always directly winning, he is moving the ball while the courts wait and talk and think because he gets things done in the meantime, whether that is ousting people or arresting people or all the things we've all lived together in this first year of this second and more aggressive Trump administration, second term. And here's some wider context. Nobel Prize winning economist Paul Krugman was laying out the stakes of why this is both autocratically similar to some of those other problems I mentioned, but also higher stakes, because he says Fed Chair Powell must hold the line. If he caves, the implications are profound and disastrous. The U.S. well on its way to becoming Turkey, where an authoritarian ruler imposed crackpot economics on the central bank, sending inflation soaring 80%. Now, we don't know exactly if we would end up in that exact economic condition, but it is well known that autocrats who seize control over their country's economies are usually a net loss. This has been studied throughout history. Today's autocratic threats in America clearly have a MAGA right-wing bent. That's just a fact. But the empirical point Krugman is making, and I want to linger on this with you for a minute tonight, the factual point is not partisan or ideological. You can be worried about this without any regard to your feelings for Donald Trump, positive, negative, or neutral, because history is full of autocrats seizing economic control the same way they wanted control of weapons or speech, only to find market crashes, shortages, even famine, which we saw in the autocratic left-wing Chinese Mao example. And this is taught both in political science classes and economics classes. If you read a history of the 20th century, it's a big part of the lead up to the Cold War. It has been well established a free market cannot thrive with artificial autocratic central control by one single unaccountable self-declared enlightened leader, be it Mao or Trump or anyone else, Mao being a left-wing example. That's the context for resistance from the Fed and Wall Street over Trump's longer effort here to either control, reshape, or oust members of the Fed. And the dangers to economic independence tonight aren't coming to you in a vacuum. Finance leaders often claim that Wall Street just reflects reality rather than shaping it. They think, and they tell us, they can be largely apolitical as long as they get what they want, which usually involves leaving them alone. Deregulation, lower taxes, etc. Well, some of them were wrong. Maybe those were talking points and they believed or knew things were more complex, nuanced. Or maybe they really believed it and Trump had to show another group of elites what so many other people have understood, which is why his approval's underwater. This Fed clash is a classic example of how even privileged, powerful people cannot just sit out a full-blown autocratic threat. Bank CEOs may not fear being personally arrested by armed agents and National Guard members, and they have wealth and power to deter that kind of crackdown hitting them personally, although it is already hitting some of Trump's perceived opponents who also have some power, from Democratic lawmakers to his former aide John Bolton, a longtime conservative Republican, whose criticism of Trump led to the president and his FBI chief advocating for Bolton's prosecution. And then there it is on Friday, the FBI going in and out of his home and office. Again, I told you it's not always partisan. He's not just a Republican. He was a longtime conservative Republican, then a MAGA Republican in that senior post for Trump. But it's not enough if you are on the wrong side of him now. That's the thing about autocratic leaders. So he's facing a crackdown that raises huge questions for the FBI and DOJ. We have not seen public evidence to substantiate the search on your screen. We also, journalistically, will keep an open mind. If evidence comes to light that suggests this is a very valid case and not just a response to Trump's public calls to punish him, we'll report that as well. But clearly, big questions here, and it's not in a vacuum. Again, the theme tonight, the theme based on reality, Trump is talking up a federal probe of another Republican critic, Chris Christie, who used to also be a federal prosecutor. He's pushing smears and legal attacks on other Democrats, including this sort of thin, paperwork-driven claim about mortgage fraud being raised against more than one perceived opponent. But the bankers and other elites are also seeing how fast an abuse of power can at least upend their work financially, smashing the Fed's independence in a way we haven't seen since its founding over a century ago. That's within this first year. Is it just going to slow down, cool off? I don't know. Have you been paying attention? Does Wall Street understand this man who they have helped give so much power to? Because Trump is demanding power over private companies' hiring and recruitment policies, whether they use DEI or not, something that in our free market companies should decide for themselves. And now, again, you might have missed some of this with all the news going on and living your summer life, but The Trump administration wants to buy up private companies so this administration can exert more control. So for executives who thought the pressure would be put on others, they are quickly learning more hard lessons. This administration taking, for example, a whole 10th stake in the giant chipmaker Intel.
Can you explain the rationale behind taking this 10% stake?
They worked out a deal where Intel is going to get the CHIPS money, but in exchange, we're going to get some equity.
So we should expect the U.S. government to be taking more equity stakes in businesses around the country.
It's possible. Yeah, that's absolutely right.
Why shouldn't the U.S. government say, you know what, we use Palantir services. We would like a piece of Palantir. We use Boeing services. We would like a piece of Boeing. I guess the question is, where's the line?
Oh, there's a monstrous discussion about defense. I mean, Lockheed Martin makes 97% of their revenue from the U.S. government. They are basically an arm of the U.S. government.
With the troops in the streets and the imagery in Washington and giant banners draped over public buildings with more and more of your leader's face, when it's not even eyeing a next campaign because Trump is legally barred from any more presidential campaigns. And yet, as in so many other situations, he seems to give away where his mind is going, musing twice in 2 days about a dictatorship.
And they say, we don't need him, freedom, freedom. He's a dictator, he's a dictator. A lot of people are saying maybe we like a dictator. So the line is that I'm a dictator, but I stop crime. So a lot of people say, you know, if that's the case, I'd rather have a dictator.
And yet, if you look at these examples from the economy to the crackdowns to the arrests, who is feeling safer?
Joining us now, Jasmine Wright, White House correspondent for Notice, Ashley Parker, staff writer at The Atlantic and an MSNBC political analyst, and Stuart Stevens, Mitt Romney's chief strategist for his 2012 campaign. Jasmine, I don't know how you're reading what we just heard from the president, what he's been saying over the last many days. Are there signs he might be wavering in the face of this pushback from Chicago, from the governor, the mayor? What are we expecting here?
Well, I think it's clear here, Chris, is that the president is still deciding whether or not to send in the troops, and honestly, what it would look like, because Chicago and Illinois broadly has basically said that we don't want them and we're not going to be complicit in what you want to do. And so that changes the dynamic of what the federal government can actually do if he were to send in the troops. Obviously, it wouldn't look like D.C. because of the uniqueness of D.C. Obviously, we have the Home Rule Act here and other measures that make Trump really more emboldened to do a lot more here locally that just don't exist in other places. And so we were talking to an administration official for the Notice newsletter out this morning who basically said that if we do go in, again, that possible word there, if we do go in, it could look a lot like what we did in Los Angeles. So I think it's very much so under consideration. I think one interesting thing that the president continues to say is, I want to be appreciated for my efforts in tamping down crime. And he also said that Democrats are falling into a trap by being against what I want to do on crime. And so obviously there is the real component of what people are actually going to be experiencing if Donald Trump were to do that. But then there's also that political component, which he's been talking about a lot today.
Stuart, after saying that the National Guard is not needed, Governor Pritzker told our Shaquille Brewster what he does need from the federal government. Here's what he said.
What I'd like him to do is to restore the funding that he's taken away from our local police. He's defunding police, and that is having a deleterious effect, if anything.
Are you talking about the violence prevention numbers there?
Not just violence prevention dollars, but literally we have programs that allow us to work with federal agencies that he is taking the money away from. So it's violence prevention, it's dealing with violent crime, with guns, and making sure that we're addressing it in a very aggressive way. But when you take away literally billions of dollars, you are causing a problem, not helping.
So working cooperatively, Stuart, and restoring millions of dollars, how do you rate the chances of that happening?
I'd say it's pretty slim. I just have to say, as somebody who works in the Republican Party, who would consider myself a conservative, along with rolling out the red carpet for Putin, a sweetheart deal for Maxwell, and taking a government stake in Intel, the idea that you're going to use federal troops is sort of really like the last straw. Any pretext that the Republican Party is a conservative party. I mean, this is what conspiracy theorists 10 years ago were railing about the Obama administration doing, because there was an exercise in Texas called Jade Helm 15. Remember that? They said this proves that the government is trying to take over. So now we have these federal troops. You have my home state of Mississippi sends 200 National Guards. The murder rate in Jackson, Mississippi is 3 times that of Washington, D.C. I mean, if the governor steps out of his house, which is in downtown Jackson, he's at much greater risk than he is walking around D.C. So the whole thing is complete fraud. And it's just astounding to me that Republicans who railed against this kind of thing haven't called this out more. Because, I mean, if you're going to establish you can do this, what next? I mean, these are the same troops that can take away your guns. It's really just shows what a sort of fraud the Republican Party has been.
And Ashley, there's been a lot of conversation about what might be next. Obviously, Chicago, Baltimore, New York City, where I live, has come up. An NYPD spokesperson tells NBC News that the police commissioner talked to the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, and also sent the message New York doesn't need federal or National Guard support, saying, quote, "We got this." I wonder if you think Trump's relationship with Mayor Eric Adams might change the administration's approach to, say, New York versus other cities.
Well, again, if you look at the pattern so far of the cities and particularly the states where Trump is threatening to go into, they are all very clearly blue states with Democratic governors and cities he views as antagonistic to them. I mean, Chicago in particular, I can remember during his 2016 campaign covering him when protests in Chicago shut down one of his rallies. And so, yes, a lot of this, to broadly answer your question, is relationship based. There's certainly cities with high crime in purple states, or Stewart pointed out, in red states where he's not talking about. And so there's certainly a world where a more positive relationship with, for instance, Mayor Adams might impact the president's thinking. And you've also seen Trump with Chicago. You're sort of leaning into moving into Chicago next as the next city where he wanted to use the National Guard and other means to tackle crime. Then he sort of backed away. But then when Governor Pritzker seemed to be antagonistic to him, he sort of was reanimated to put the idea on the table. So like with everything with Trump, it's relationship based, it's transactional, and it's political.
So we just heard, Stuart, from the president, who is still at that cabinet meeting, and he was talking about Washington, D.C., and how he wants to get tough on crime. This is new. Take a listen to what he just said.
Anybody murders something in the Capitol, capital punishment, capital punishment. If somebody kills somebody in the Capitol, Washington, D.C., we're going to be seeking the death penalty. And that's a very strong preventative.
Well, I think if you look at the research, there is no indication that that works to stop people from killing people. But I wonder about the politics of this, Stuart, because support, and there's some recent polls, I think from Pew, Gallup, legit organizations, that show that the support in the United States for capital punishment is at a 5-year low. It's still around 50%, but it's at a 5-year low. We are the only Western civilized society that has capital punishment. But obviously, he thinks that there is big political gain for this. What do you read into what he just said? And then, I'll go back to you, Ashley, after we hear from Stuart on that.
Look, the death penalty has been sort of an obsession with Donald Trump. Remember, he took out a full-page ad about the Central Park Five to say that they should get the death penalty. And even after they were exonerated and it was proven that they were not guilty, he still called for the death penalty for them. So, I think this is sort of an old sort of 80s, 90s Republican trope. I think the country has moved on. I don't think that this gets him anything politically. It sounds completely just too political. It's not going to stop any crime, and people have come to that realization.
I do think what we're seeing, Ashley, is certainly a level of not backing down, right? A level of consistency. He believes or says that these cities are crime-ridden and only he can fix it. I wonder what you make of what we just heard from the president.
Well, in certain ways, it's part of a strategy that Donald Trump deploys, often with great success, where he, especially on issues that he views as his strength and a Democratic weakness, like immigration, like crime, like transgender sports, he will sort of bait Democrats with increasingly extreme or outlandish statements. Sometimes he seems to genuinely believe them and have the ability to enact them. Sometimes he doesn't. And his goal oftentimes is that Democrats sort of overreact and, to put it in layman's terms, lose their minds in a way that is bad for them politically. So, for instance, in D.C., it's more complicated than one side or the other. There's plenty of people, D.C. is a Democratic city, who live in D.C., who are very aware that the crime numbers are falling, who don't want the National Guard in D.C., who don't like what Donald Trump is doing or saying, but who also say, you know what? Yeah, as a resident, I've had some uncomfortable brushes with crime. Anecdotally, vibes-wise, in the same way the election in certain ways was decided by vibes on the economy, don't always feel safe. And so there is a benefit for Trump and a risk for Democrats of sort of over-responding to him in a way that minimizes how some of the residents in these cities do feel, even though they disagree with Trump's numbers, they disagree with his rhetoric, they disagree with his behavior, and they disagree with his approach.
So it was very interesting yesterday, Jasmine. There was a town hall in Missouri. The Republican Congressman Mark Elford appeared to push back against Donald Trump's latest threats to bring in the National Guard. Here's a little tiny snippet of what he said.
I do not think that we should be sending National Guard into other cities.
He says only if governors request them. Now, we should say he won his seat with 71% of the vote, so it seems like he's pretty safe. But are you hearing anything to suggest in D.C. that there is a line that other Republicans will draw?
Yeah, I mean, I think we haven't actually seen that so far. Obviously, Donald Trump said yesterday about a different topic, but he said that we'll just do it and Congress will go along with it. And so I think that is how the White House views the role of Congress right now, that basically they are somebody to help Donald Trump get across big policy pieces. But for the majority of the things that Donald Trump wants to do, including expanding his presidential powers, he feels that he can do it alone. And I think we've seen over the course of the last 8 months that Congress hasn't really pushed back on it. Now, of course, that was a congressman from Maryland. Even though he did win with 71% of the vote, it's still a pretty blue state. Obviously, there's been some talk from Governor Wes Moore about whether or not he would actually look at redistricting to write that seat out potentially. And so I think that congressman specifically, and maybe a couple across the country that are in more of a purple area, more of a blue area, places where Kamala Harris won in 2024, may be a little bit more resistant to Donald Trump, particularly because people do not necessarily like the feds in their area, even if they believe that crime is higher than it should be. But I don't think that you should expect to see it holistically from the Republican Party at all, because they haven't really been pushing back on anything that Donald Trump has done, even though it has really taken away a lot of their powers here in D.C.
Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. Donald Trump, the president of these United States, wants to be a dictator. He is trying to be a dictator. He said it multiple times this week. Today, he explained why a lot of people, I think in his own head, think he should be a dictator because he's stopping all the crimes.
So the line is that I'm a dictator, but I stop crime. So a lot of people say, you know, if that's the case, I'd rather have a dictator. But I'm not a dictator. I just know how to stop crime.
Ah, yes, Donald Trump, tough on crime. It just depends on who's doing the crime, doesn't it? Beyond all his administration's lies and the mobilization of federal law enforcement in Los Angeles and Washington and members of the U.S. military, Donald Trump is the most unabashedly pro-criminal, pro-crime president of my lifetime. In fact, I started compiling this list Of all the people that Donald Trump has pardoned or come to the aid of just since taking office in January, and it is mind-boggling. On his first day in office, Donald Trump pardoned every last one of the January 6th insurrectionists who stormed the Capitol and attempted a coup against the U.S. government on his behalf. Roughly 1,500 convicted or suspected accused criminals. They included hundreds who were handed lengthy sentences for very serious felonies, such as assaulting police with deadly weapons. Many of those rioters have had, maybe you won't be shocked to hear this, serious brushes with the law since they were pardoned. Andrew Tate is one example. He used a metal whip and bear spray to assault police officers at the Capitol. He was sentenced to 6 years after bragging about these crimes to a woman on a dating app. 2 weeks after being pardoned by Trump and freed from prison, he was arrested in Texas for soliciting a minor for sex. Then on the second day of his presidency, Donald Trump pardoned Ross Ulbricht, founder of the Silk Road and online black market for drug dealing. The guy took hundreds of millions in commissions on sales of methamphetamine, cocaine, heroin, and other opioids. I mean, you could make a case he was the biggest drug dealer in American history. He was serving 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole when Donald Trump pardoned him unconditionally. On his third day in office, Trump pardoned Washington, D.C. police officer Tara Sutton and Lieutenant Andrew Zabowski. Sutton illegally chased a 20-year-old man on a moped for 10 blocks. He struck another car and died in the crash. The 2 officers then tried to cover up their role in his death. They were sentenced to hard time for obstructing justice. Trump pardoned them, falsely claiming the motorist they had killed was illegal. They have since been reinstated to the D.C. police force. Trump also pardoned former Illinois Governor Rod Blagojevich, convicted on 17 counts of corruption, including an attempt that we all remember and all heard to sell off Barack Obama's former Senate seat. Trump pardoned him using the former Democrat's criminal case as a way to discount the myriad investigations, indictments, and convictions that he faced. He pardoned Brian Kelsey, a Republican former Tennessee state senator, a guy that was 2 weeks into a 21-month sentence for a campaign finance fraud when Trump pardoned him. He illegally funneled nearly $100,000 into a failed congressional campaign. In May, Trump pardoned Todd and Julie Chrisley, TV reality stars who were serving federal prison sentences for wire and bank fraud. The lavish lifestyle they flaunted on air was apparently bankrolled by fraudulent bank loans the couple hid from tax authorities. They were two of nearly 24 convicted fraudsters, thieves, and drug dealers Trump pardoned in May. Again, this is way beyond the pace of any president in my lifetime. He also pardoned Trevor Milton. He was the founder of an electric truck company. He was sentenced to federal prison for exaggerating the company's technology, up to and including a fake commercial in which they pushed an immobile model of the truck down a hill to make it look like it could really drive fast.
With all the cameras in place, the director calls action and sends the truck. Powered by nothing but gravity, this shell of a truck gathers a big head of steam. By the time it passes the film crew, it's cruising at interstate speed. Beautiful. Cut.
The truck didn't actually work. Milton went to jail for it because he defrauded people. Last year, he donated $1.8 million to Donald Trump's campaign, and Trump pardoned him in March. Thanks to that pardon, Milton will not need to compensate his shareholders who lost millions. Now, that is just a partial list of Trump's pardons and commutations since he took office 7 months ago. It's a wild list. It's unlike any list I've ever seen or ever covered. But in that time, he has also gone out of his way to accommodate some of the worst accused and convicted criminals you can imagine. Like the manosphere influencers Andrew and Tristan Tate, who have been accused in multiple countries of rape, human trafficking, and sex with minors. In fact, they have been held for 3 years on charges in Romania when allies in the Trump administration worked to have them repatriated to the U.S. as within weeks of being at home, Andrew Tate, who denies the many, many horrible charges against him, faced new legal trouble.
In a civil suit filed in Los Angeles this week, model Bree Stern accusing Tate of sexually assaulting and choking her at the Beverly Hills Hotel earlier this month. Stern sitting down with NBC News from Los Angeles in her first interview about that night.
Talk to me about what was going through your mind in that moment.
I was scared to death. I was terrified that I might die.
Remember, the Trump administration went out of their way to get the Tates and bring them into the U.S. And it's also important to remember, even as Trump and his aides were falsely accusing hundreds of men, from hairdressers to soccer enthusiasts, of being hardcore MS-13 gang members and disappearing them from the country, that federal prosecutors under Trump are now quietly dropping charges against the actual bona fide leaders of that gang they spent years pursuing and charging. In fact, Trump is actually freeing those gang leaders and sending them to El Salvador's president, Nayib Bukele. And the Trump administration may be doing it to cover up corruption. According to a New York Times investigation, U.S. prosecutors have amassed substantial evidence of a corrupt pact between the Salvadoran government and some high-ranking MS-13 leaders who they say agreed to drive down violence and bolster Bukele politically in exchange for cash and perks in jail. Don't forget, Trump also intervened on the behalf of a man named Dahoud Hanid Ortiz, a U.S. Venezuelan dual citizen who returned here as part of that prisoner swap from Venezuela last month. This individual was convicted of bludgeoning 3 people to death in an office in Spain where he was looking for a man he suspected of sleeping with his ex-girlfriend. He murdered 3 people, according to Venezuelan courts. He was charged in Madrid. He was brought back to the U.S. and freed by Donald Trump, according to the most recent reporting, whereabouts unknown, just out in the country. And then, of course, there's Ghislaine Maxwell, the Palm Beach socialite who recruited and groomed young women for child sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein. Many of Epstein's accusers say Maxwell also abused them personally. She knows as much as anyone alive about Epstein's depraved crimes and his associates, and the Trump administration moved her to a minimum security prison against existing federal prison policy, giving her an extraordinary waiver to be in a prison she couldn't be in because she's a sex offender. After interviewing her for 2 days and getting her on tape saying she never saw Donald Trump be anything but a perfect gentleman. These are the criminal, an unbelievable list of people who have done truly awful things, most of them convicted felons, some accused of doing truly awful things. Each one of these alone would be a scandal that wrecked another administration. Do you remember the single Willie Horton ad in 1988? And all that list of all these people, I mean, MS-13 kingpins, people convicted of a triple homicide, a woman who's the accomplice of the most notorious sex trafficker in American history. They all come from the man who claims he's undoing American carnage, fixing a rampant crime problem that largely exists only in his mind and serves, obviously, as a pretext for targeting his political enemies, whoever they may be, targeting people like recently, and we'll get into this later, Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook claiming she committed mortgage fraud, needs to be fired, or raiding John Bolton's home and office, saying he mishandled classified information, threatening to reopen the Bridgegate investigation because former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie criticized him on TV. Right? All these people that are his enemies are criminals, or backing criminals. And he claims that so he can seek retribution. A rhetorical exercise that flies in the face of reality and the statistics. I mean, what's crazy about this right now, as opposed to, say, 2020, 2021, when we saw a big spike in crime around the country, is we are in the midst of, under the last 2 years of the Biden administration and the first 8-9 months of this year, having nothing to do with Donald Trump, historic and really genuinely encouraging huge drops in crime, both violent and nonviolent. But that doesn't matter. He spent the decade saying the opposite of what we know to be true. There has never been a president in recent American history who has gone out of his way, who has done more to free more criminals and accommodate more crimes than Donald Trump.
Trying to make sense of this, there are a few goals here. Donald Trump, like lots of presidents, wants lower interest rates than the Fed wants. Donald Trump is trying to now, when he couldn't get his way with Jerome Powell, tried to describe him as some sort of mismanager as it relates to the renovations of the Fed. He had that little hard hat tour of the Fed. Now he goes after Lisa Powell for mortgage fraud, which apparently everybody's getting. Adam Schiff's got mortgage fraud, and Tish James has mortgage fraud. The whole thing just stinks.
It does. And Donald Trump doesn't have a right to fire a governor on the Federal Reserve. As you just pointed out, no president has ever done this. This is an independent agency acknowledged as such, quasi-private, by the U.S. Supreme Court, not 100 years ago, but just this May. And I am glad, given what Donald Trump's doing, I am glad that Governor Cook is standing up, because you've got a situation here where he's trying to put his thumb on everyone he can find, on the judges, on the Republicans in Congress who seem to be acquiescing every single day to what he wants, on the Federal Reserve. And this is a time to stand up. You think about what the Federal Reserve does here. It looks at this creeping inflation problem that Donald Trump owns, and then you look at the role, the important role they play in standing up for Americans in this economy. But the second piece of this is what you got up way beyond the legal part, is why does he do this? He wants to distract people from what he should own, and that is this economy. Because of the Trump tariff taxes, $2,400 on every single family in America, on what's been happening to farmers in my state with their markets drying up, with the ag economy. You pointed out the John Deere firings and the John Deere terminations, I should say, that are related actually to, they said themselves, to what's happening with the farm economy.
Yep.
He doesn't want to own it. He blames a statistician. Remember that? Just in the last month? I thought that was ironic, this well-trusted statistician, and he gets bad job numbers, and then he fires someone, making the job numbers worse.
Yeah. I mean, for the head of the BLS is somebody nobody knew. Lisa Cook is somebody whose name you didn't know. These are these people. He wants to call them the deep state.
Right.
These are these people who just do their work largely behind closed doors.
Right. And so owning this is what he needs to do. Changing his policies is what he needs to do. And we're just seeing the beginnings of this with the effects of these tariffs. And you're just seeing, so far, I think there was just a recent study showing something like 20% of it has been absorbed by consumers, and we're going to see 60% more in the next few months. And by the way, in the biggest cabinet meeting of all, the Minnesota State Fair, where I've been hanging out, while you guys have been glued to watching him at this cabinet meeting, I've been at the real cabinet meeting with 2 million people. They know what's going on. And those are the numbers and the people that you see in these polls where he is tanking on his handling of the economy, because their grocery bills don't lie, their rent doesn't lie, their child care bills don't lie, their back-to-school costs for their kids' clothing don't lie, the strollers costs, none of this. They know what this is. He cannot fire his way out of this economy.
Yeah, I mean, you know me. I'm a big fan of Minnesota and a big fan of State Fair, so I would choose the Minnesota State Fair over pretty much everything else. But let's talk about that, because this is where stats that you have about Medicare, about health care cuts, about SNAP cuts, about agriculture, the $2,400 increase that inflation is going to hit each household, that the Yale Budget Lab has come up with those figures. So that's all figures and numbers, and of course, the jobs numbers that he fired somebody for. And then you're out there talking to people. You're out there talking to real Americans. $2,400, we learned in the pandemic, and we learned in the recession of 2008. Most regular American folks don't have a whole bunch of extra money for emergencies.
They do not, and we're seeing that shrinking and shrinking as they're eating up their savings, just trying to get by. And what he should be working on, which I believe we should be working on, and that I know the Democratic Party is going to be focused on, is bringing down the cost of housing, building more housing, doing something about child care, and getting some innovative partnerships, public-private, when it comes to child care, bringing down health care costs, not kicking 15 million people off their health care as they did in the big, beautiful betrayal of a bill, or not taking care of these premiums that you're going to see skyrocketing in the next few months, both for people on the Affordable Care Act and people on other plans. We've already seen the numbers coming out because they decided instead they wanted to give trillions of dollars in tax cuts to billionaires. That is exactly what happened in the big, beautiful betrayal of a bill. They gave $2 trillion in tax cuts to rich people and then let everyone else suffer. And I'm telling you, the people that come up to me, the real stories of people with their moms in the nursing homes, worried that they're going to have to, they won't be able to afford that anymore. People who have one job and then a second job, but they still need SNAP to help them because they're a single mom. Those are the people that I talk to.
And by the way, the SNAP issue,
the people that are let in his cabinet meeting today.
There's a direct line between the SNAP cuts and rural America and farms and the layoffs at John Deere. Because people forget, USAID, which a lot of people didn't pay any attention to, and SNAP cuts both have a whole lot to do with farming and agriculture in this country.
Exactly. And this is a real gut punch for farmers, but it's also the rural communities because they produce the food, right? They grow the corn, they produce the beef, they grow the pigs, and that is what is used for food for not only SNAP programs for veterans and seniors and people with kids, but also for a lot of our aid that we give overseas. So he has taken the rug out from under those two programs, while at the same time these tariffs are hitting them and drying up their markets. So when I heard tonight that we won this seat in Iowa, which is a very rural seat, in the state Senate, I thought, yeah, I'm not surprised at all. When I see us leading in these races around the country in these areas that are rural, what I think about those Social Security offices in the middle of North Carolina that are shutting down or not answering their phones, where I'm so happy that former Governor Cooper is running. I'm telling you, he's going to win that Senate seat. Or I think about in Ohio, where Sherrod Brown is going to come back. And he's running for that seat because he knows exactly what's happening in his state as we're seeing jobs being lost, as we see what's happening right now with costs for people who are just trying to get by, families trying to get by. These states that are all in the mix here with Alaska and Iowa and North Carolina, these states, they've got big rural areas, and they're the ones that are seeing all of these small businesses and roadkill that we're seeing when it comes to the tariffs. And it's only going to get worse, and he won't change his mind. All he does is blame other people, including the Federal Reserve governor today.
Senator, good to talk to you as always. Thank you for joining us tonight, Senator Amy Klobuchar.
It was great to be on, Allie. Come back to the Minnesota State Fair.
I will be there before you know it. I'll be happy to see you again there.